In our studies of the nervous system, we're going to investigate nervous impulses, and they're going to be transmitted by neurons, and it's responsible for distributing sensory and motor impulses. Here in the diagram, the tongue is getting a stimulus from whatever it's eating, and that is then being transmitted through the brain to a motor neuron through the salivary gland to produce saliva. The nervous system consists of the central nervous system, the brain and spinal column, and the peripheral nervous system, which connects the central nervous system to organs and other parts of the body. So the nerve impulse is an electrical stimulus transmitted along and within a neuron. So neurons have four main parts, and we're going to look at the cell body, and that has a nucleus with all of the neuron's genetic material, and the molecules the neuron needs are produced there, including proteins. There's the axon, tail-like strip, which transmits messages from the cell. Axons are short in the cortex of the brain and long, traveling from the brain down the spinal cord. The axon terminal at the end of the axon has hundreds of branches and will connect to another neuron or an effector like a muscle cell. The dendrites, which are attached to the cell body, are very branched and receive messages from another nerve cell. And you can pause here to get the vocabulary. And here we have different neuron types. We're going to particularly just look at number 3. And the different types of neurons: sensory neurons, motor neurons, and interneurons, which connect sensory and motor neurons, and then complex neurons in the brain. We're going to look at the nerve impulses, and the interactions between neurons enable people to think, move, maintain homeostasis, feel emotions, and lots more. An adult human brain contains 100 million neurons. And here's something that almost looks like a photograph of a brain cell active. And the neurons transmit electrical impulses within the individual nerve cells. And they transmit in one direction only. So from the dendrite through the axon to the axon terminal. And we're going to look in detail at the electrical impulses in the axon. To begin with, we're going to start with the resting potential of a nerve cell. And in humans, it's about -70 millivolts. And it's maintained by an energy-dependent sodium-potassium pump that keeps sodium levels low inside a neuron and potassium levels higher inside the neuron. The impulses are very quick, 2 milliseconds across a single nerve cell, and to travel 100 meters, it would be barely 1 second. And so we have the resting potential. And here we're seeing that the potassium channels and the sodium channels are closed, and the sodium pump is maintaining more sodium outside than inside. And here we're just looking at the sodium-potassium pump, which uses energy and phosphate from ATP to transport 3 sodium ions out for every 2 potassium ions in. And as the neuron receives a stimulus from another neuron, depolarization will occur, which shifts the electric charge distribution. And so the resting potential of negative 70 millivolts then increases to 30, 40 millivolts, called depolarization, by an influx of sodium ions into the cell. And that depolarization is going to be followed by a repolarization with a drop in the potential. And here, with depolarization and increasing to about 40 millivolts, you've got the sodium channel open, the potassium channel closed, and the sodium pump really not doing anything at all at this stage. And after the rest of the potential has plummeted down, it actually goes below the resting potential, which is hyperpolarization, and the cell then has a refractory period where it cannot receive any impulses. And here you see the decrease in sodium ions and having the potential below the resting potential. And just looking at a voltage-gated sodium channel, the top one, it's open and there can be an influx of sodium ions, which will give rise to depolarization and raising the resting potential. And you then have the channels eventually deactivated or inactivated here, where depolarization will end. And you need to pause to look at this little table, which really describes what's happening in all of the regions of the cycle: the resting potential, the active potential, which includes depolarization, repolarization, and the refractory potential. And a diagram here where each of the cylinders is showing the progression of the action potential moving along the axon like a wave, and depolarization changes the internal negative to positive and flows along the axon. You can also have saltatory conduction, a looping conduction between the segments, only dealing with the parts that don't have the myelin sheath. So going from node to node, they're called the nodes of Ranvier, and it's faster than the depolarization type conduction. And neurons, just been looking, involves electrical signals relaying information from one part of a neuron to another part in the same neuron. But if you are connecting one neuron to another, it's going to be, the signal is going to be a chemical signal to pass the information. And we're going to look at that. So there is a small gap here in the diagram, it's been enlarged, between the axon terminal of one neuron and the dendrite of another. And there'll be chemicals passed, neurotransmitters pass through this space. Here the gap has been much reduced, and so you've got a presynaptic neuron on the left, which is going to provide chemical information to the postsynaptic neuron on the right. So you can see here there's a gap, no physical connection between them. It's a chemical message. And the synaptic space, and a neuron will have hundreds of synapses with other neurons. So possible neurotransmitters, excitatory neurotransmitters make cells more active, while inhibitory ones dampen a cell's activity. So the excitatory ones are acetylcholine and glutamate. The inhibitory ones, gamma aminobutyric acid, serotonin, and dopamine. So the brain and the nervous system, whole nervous system, is very, very complex, and there are a large number of problems which can occur, and 100 million will suffer from some disorder, brain disorder, at some time in our lives. And here's a list of some of the major disorders: Huntington's disease and muscular dystrophy. Some of these are genetic. Cerebral palsy, Parkinson's, a stroke, vascular dementia, trauma from spinal cord or head injury, convulsive disorders such as epilepsy, infectious diseases such as AIDS and dementia, and tumours. And here are a number of activities that you can do. So obviously pause these and get the information from both of these slides. And with thanks to Washington International School Team Science and Ms. Beres's IB biology class. Much appreciation.